I'm Kristen Solomon, court liaison and advocate with Right Turn Impact. Today I'm sitting down with someone whose career has spanned prosecution, public policy, and public service, working on issues that impact communities across Maryland. I'm here today with attorney Sarah David. Let's go inside and talk with her about her experience, her perspective, and the impact she's already been making in Baltimore County.
I started working in counterterrorism, and I got into that after 9/11. And so I started working on sort of the law enforcement side of that, and my boss told me that I was doing a really good job in sort of the intelligence space, but that if I wanted to really advance in that world, I would have to get a gun or I'd have to get a law degree. And so I got a law degree, and the idea was, to become a prosecutor and to, work with and understand sort of the counterterrorism cases as a prosecutor. But when I came back here for law school to Maryland, Greg Bernstein was elected to be the state's attorney, and he was doing some really interesting things in that office. And so I was excited to join up with that. And then my career sort of went into the prosecutorial world and then transitioned a little bit into the political world when I was chief of staff to the chairman of the Judicial Proceedings Committee in Annapolis. And that took me into corruption work, which I really like. And a lot of people say, well, corruption and counterterrorism, they're so different. But they're really about understanding money, understanding networks, and having sort of a respect for something that you don't understand, and then trying to figure out what happened in those spheres. And I enjoy that part of it a lot. I think that, what's important about these cases that get a lot of publicity is that they really do have an opportunity to make systematic change, but also the decision to charge becomes it always is, but it becomes an extremely powerful position when everyone's going to remember that person was charged with a crime, regardless of sort of the outcome of the case. And so it's important to really think about, what you can prove, how you can prove it, and also to understand, what's interesting in corruption cases is often the question is that a crime, right? And so a lot of things have to come into that decision with perspective. And when you start investigating spaces that aren't the places you live, that don't represent systems that you're familiar with, you learn sort of the humility of making sure that you're being very thorough, that you're taking into account different perspectives and understanding as much of something foreign to you as you can. And I think that transitioning that sort of empathy and thoroughness to general prosecution would make a big difference and can make a big difference.
Mm-hmm. So when you step back and look at the system as a whole, where do you think we're getting into it right, and where do you think we're missing the mark?
So I've talked to this a lot, about this a lot in Baltimore County, and I think that sort of the lack of vision is really that what we can do as a community together to make our community safer is important. And that the more that we are siloed and the more that we think that one person or one office is responsible for everything, the less effective we are. And so my vision is really one to enhance public safety with buy-ins of different communities that can help with that. And that's what we did at the NYPD. After 9/11, there was a real understanding that it was the frontline law enforcement officers being able to identify terrorist threats that could make a huge difference. And not just the officers, but also members of different communities, whether that's the business community, the banking community, the general public. I'm sure everyone remembers, see something, say something, right? And Baltimore County really hasn't taken sort of advantage of the fact that we have really incredible things happening in our county in all different types of communities, where people would love to contribute to the public safety mission and just haven't been given the opportunity to do so. And so I think building that is a huge vision distinction between what can be and what is.
Regarding treatment, so one thing we see every day is that when treatment is a part of the process, that outcomes change. So from your perspective, where does treatment fit into the justice system?
So treatment is an essential part of the justice system. And you're right, when treatment happens, outcomes change. And by the way, as you allude to, that's something we can track. And so by partnering with programs that have a track record of success, right, we can make sure that we are coupling people with things that they need to get better, right? So if somebody commits, a low-level crime and it's because they're suffering from addiction, which is a disease, right? Getting them treatment for that disease is an important aspect of making sure they don't reoffend. Numbers related to people who reoffend with addiction are sky high if there's not treatment. So we're not making anyone safer if we're not treating that aspect of it. And that's another great example of where we have incredible community partners that we're not taking advantage of. And having buy-in from the communities of people that do this about what works, what has a track record of success, will help us guide, where we should allocate our resources as well. And I think that space is one that we should be putting a lot of resources into and that we really haven't been in Baltimore County. Yeah, I think that, people sort of see things sometimes, because they see the politics of it as sort of an either or, that you should never have, a jail situation if somebody is suffering from addiction, or you should always have, et cetera. And I think that the important thing is coming back to sort of our first question and understanding the differences of each case and training prosecutors to evaluate each case. Any of us, right, who've had addiction in our family know that there are times when sort of jail is necessary, because that's one of the best ways to get people to get treatment. One of the most unfortunate aspects of addiction is sometimes part of the disease makes it difficult to get treatment, right? And so there has to be a holistic assessment of who is this person, what will help them. And I think that, by not sort of creating overarching policies that don't take into account the individualization of these processes, we can actually make a really big difference in people's lives. And most importantly, right, make our community safer all together.
In your experience, what happens when the legal system, like defense attorneys, prosecutors, and treatment providers, are actually working together instead of in silos?
I mean, that's sort of where the magic happens, right? And we have, a fantastic director of our drug court here in Baltimore County, Jesse Pieri, who has been really revolutionizing the way that we treat these systems. And if we can get sort of the prosecutors on board in that space, I think we can see a really great difference, innovative solutions. But I'll also note that there's a community impact too, right? It can't just be in the courtroom. And I think that one of the really great things, and I'll call out our fantastic colleagues in Frederick, who, I just attended the Phoenix Recovery Academy 5K, which is a really wonderful nonprofit program that helps teenagers who are suffering from substance abuse get substance abuse treatment as part of their high school curriculum. And their relapse rate is so significantly less, I believe last I heard 80% less than people who don't get that treatment. But it's not just what they're doing in the school, right? It's also the community showing up for them. And the organization has a 5K race where there are prosecutors, sheriffs, public defenders, drug treatment coordinators, people who've been successful, people in treatment, and the whole community, the business community, shows up to say that this is a community priority. And I would love to see more of those spaces here in Baltimore County, because I think we have the community commitment for them. We just don't have a leadership vision bringing those voices together.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that, it's a campaign slogan, but it's true, right? I hope to make Baltimore County safer. And so we say safer with Sarah. And the idea is that people are safer and feel safer. Both are important. We have to sort of make sure that we are engaging with communities to make sure that they feel that they are part of the justice process, because without that input, we are really not creating the feeling of safety. And you can point to, a statistic all day long, but if my, neighbor is the victim of, a robbery, right, I don't feel safe. And there's things that we need to do to make people feel safe. But a huge part of that is having buy-in in the process, and making sure that we are really focused on crime prevention and identifying trends. Just because there are crimes that are low level, if there's a lot of those types of crimes in an area, taking a prevention tactic can prevent a far more serious crime from occurring. And so my vision is one where the community is engaging, but also where we are tracking outcomes. Right now, the state's attorney's office doesn't make any data available to the public about what it's doing. And the challenge with that is that we're really not managing things effectively if we're not measuring them. And so I really have a vision where we're able to show data, we're able to show success, and that we'll have a record, right? And people can agree or not agree with that record. But having actual information to frame conversations and allocate resources is much more effective than just rhetoric.
And the human side of justice, how do you balance holding people accountable, like while still recognizing their capacity to change?
Yeah, I think that's key. I mean, we have to make sure we're holding people accountable, right? There's the least fair thing to a victim is to say, you, the person who did absolutely nothing wrong in this situation, are going to be punished through being re-traumatized through the trial process, and then, all of the types of post-conviction proceedings that come after that. But the balance is sort of looking at, what can we do to make sure, statistically, right, most people who are going to be incarcerated for a period of time because of a crime are going to then have to re-enter society. And the thing that would be the least effective is to do nothing to give that person any resources to re-enter society, because then all of a sudden we're just perpetuating a cycle of violence, right? And so we have to balance sort of what are our societal needs to make sure that people can re-enter society in a way that, crime and violence won't be what happens next. And I think that the key to that is so multifaceted. And we have fantastic resources for that. I'll give credit to the Goucher Prison Education Partnership, which provides college degrees to incarcerated individuals, fantastic re-entry and job training programs, substance abuse programs all around this county that are also working with incarcerated individuals so that, if they're suffering from drug addiction and commit a crime, they can work on that while they're incarcerated so that when they're re-entering society, there are bridge programs that make sure that they can continue treatment while finding a job, while getting on their feet. And then again, importantly, we can track those things. So if they're not working, we'll stop doing them. And I think that that's important too, because I hear a lot around the county, well, we just, these crimes and then nothing happens, or we just let people out, or it would be really helpful if we had the information about what was working. And so we could point people to things that were making them feel unsafe and say, well, you know what, this is what's working, and we're going to put more resources into what's working. I think most people often don't know what a state's attorney is, at least in my experience here in Baltimore County. We've knocked thousands of doors here in Baltimore County, and the number one question is, what is this office? Do we have one of these? And I think that's a really important thing to make sure that people understand. I think, of course, when people do know, sometimes there are misconceptions that prosecutors just are there to put people in jail. That's the only thing they do. Prosecutors are the most powerful force in our criminal justice system as far as where our decisions as prosecutors can frame outcomes in cases and the resources that we can bring to cases. And with strong leadership in a prosecutorial office, we can make things safer, prevent crimes, engage communities. But most importantly, people need to know that the office exists, because it's a really important space. Because any day, through no fault of anyone's, they could be a victim or witness of a crime. And they're going to have to then learn really quickly what the state's attorney is and what they do. And I think that it's better if people have that information before something terrible happens. It's better if they feel that that office is a place they can go to and that they can trust. And many other of our state's attorney offices around Maryland have invested appropriately in community resources to make people feel safe with their office, to make their office a resource for people, as opposed to something that they have to learn about when they've experienced something terrible. Look, I grew up here in Baltimore County. I grew up in Pikesville, and I, have been a part of this community for almost all of my life. But I have also had the opportunity to leave this community. I lived in Cairo, I lived in Morocco, I lived in Northern Ireland. And I think especially now, we really need somebody and more people in positions of power that not only understand sort of how processes work, how to manage an office, but have the empathy to understand where people are facing challenges, to understand that there are people that don't want to come forward, even if they witnessed a very serious crime, or even if they were a victim of a very serious crime, because they don't speak this language, or they're afraid of our systems, or what the federal government is doing with ICE is making them feel that there is nowhere that they are safe. safe. And I think that, as someone who's lived in places where I've had to rely on like 8-year-olds to tell me what a certain food is or what the bus schedule says because my linguistic skills weren't strong enough, I think that that's sort of the people that we need coming in and saying, we need to make our systems better. We need to make them work for everyone. And, I am a prosecutor. That's what I've done for most of my career, but I've done other things. And I think that that's helped me really develop a sense of empathy and understanding for different perspectives. I am not running for office because I have all the solutions, because I know all the right answers. I'm running for office because I'm willing to get people together who have those solutions to solve those problems, because I care about finding the right answers. And I think that that's a real difference from a lot of people who've been in these positions in the past. It's not just because you're trying to do the right thing doesn't mean you are doing the right thing. And if you're not taking in other people's perspectives, then you're really not going to be able to achieve a sense of justice. And I think that that's really what we've lost here in Baltimore County. I couldn't point to sort of one moment, but I think that I will say, just sort of on a personal note, and it's not related to the state's attorney's position, but it is important to me. Baltimore County is the only county in Maryland that doesn't have any women elected to our council, that has never elected a women county executive. And I think that one of the challenges is that we have not been really building a diverse bench of the perspectives that we need here in this county. There are 7 open councilmanic seats in this race, as well as obviously the county executive seat and myself running for state's attorney. And I think that what's really important looking forward to me as somebody who is a mother raising a 9-year-old son and a 5-year-old daughter in this county is that even through the course of this campaign, they have seen diverse leaders and people who are stepping forward, who are all different ages, all different races, who come from all different places to say that we are going to stand up, to take a leadership role in Baltimore County. I didn't see that when I was younger, and I'm so grateful that they're getting to see it as a part of the campaign, and I would love them to be able to see it as a part of our government. I would love to see having elected officials that bring those diverse perspectives, and I think that, I've talked a lot about why I'm running for state's attorney, but I think we need to look at our political landscape and understand that the future is broader than sort of what the past has been. And our county sort of stands alone in not really moving forward in that space. And I think that this is the year that we're going to do that. So I think like looking forward, right? Like what would it look like, after my first term as state's attorney? How would this conversation be different? And I'm hoping that this conversation will be different because we'll be able to point to so many more successes, right, from our drug court, because we'll have so many more people participating. I'm hoping that we're able to point to all of the addiction treatment programs and things that we've been able to sort of connect people with. And I'm hoping that we're able to point to, a reduction in crime based on sort of making sure that our resources, our prosecutorial resources, are allocated toward violent crime. And that we're going to see a real shift as sort of our mental health and addiction treatment cases are handled in the way that they should be handled. And that instead of sort of having these anecdotal, rhetorical conversations about what does work, like I'll be able to sit here and point to you and give you numbers about what is actually working in Baltimore County. And what I would also hope is that I'm not doing this interview alone, but that there would be other people, right, in the office, in the community, right, who'd be there to come forward and say, these are the types of things we were able to work with the state's attorney's office on, and they were so successful, and here's why. And I think that that's sort of where I see us in 4 years if I'm elected state's attorney. And I really hope that we can get together at that point and have that conversation too.